So how many of you here, by a show of hands, would describe yourself as spiritual but not religious? Probably almost all of us. And I admit I was kind of relieved when Kent said he was shifting the theme from the saints, mystics, and misfits to spirituality in the 21st century, because I was having trouble thinking about, like, what am I going to focus on with this saint stuff? But then it's like, oh, but spirituality in the 21st century. It's like, this massive topic. And I'm going to embrace what Rod said there at the end. Can you repeat that? I'll repeat it if you repeat it. Mindfulness?
It's simply being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different.
Okay. Being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different. And, as I thought about this topic and as we had pre-talk, I'm like, oh, you could throw this and you could throw this in and this and this and this. And I'm just going to wish that I'm going to be happy with whatever I bring instead of wishing it were different and thinking of all the things that could be said but aren't. Because this is a very sort of an extended meditation of sorts, because spirituality and what it means to be spiritual is so personal and individual, and that's part of what I want to share. And before looking at ideas of what it means to be spiritual, or at least what my thinking on it is, it's a good exercise to look at what it means to be religious, since spiritual is most often seen as a counterbalance to religion. And for most of us, being religious has certain connotations. It's an external organizing force that we join or we're born into, and we're either on the inside of it or the outside of it. We think of it as adherence to a particular set of beliefs or dogma that's prepackaged and preconceived, and we have little to no say in it. We either accept it or we don't, or we accept parts of it and reject others and find a way to live with that tension. At its best, because I wanted to look at this from both angles, at its best, being part of a religious tradition can bring us a beautiful sense of community, history, unity of purpose, beliefs and values, a connection to something bigger than ourselves, the feeling of stability and comfort that comes from the songs and rituals and words that form the container of that religion. It's another tribe we belong to, where we can look around the room and experience the interconnectedness and interrelatedness with all the people and all the things. It's an organizing force for good, building and running schools, hospitals, retreat centers, shelters, and food pantries. And for some folks, practicing a particular religion is seen as good because it's viewed as a way to guarantee a one-way ticket to heaven with no layovers and no carry-on luggage. And I've worked with several religious organizations over the past few years. I have one as a client right now, and they fall into that religion at its best category. I don't think I could work with one that didn't. And they exemplify all of those really wonderful traits that I just named. And I consider it, they give me hope as I interact with them and learn about them. And it's a privilege, really, to work with them in helping them fulfill their mission and their calling. And there's a darker side, too, at its worst. At its worst, religion is a rigid set of rules, and thou shalls and thou shalt nots, that can be experienced as judgment and control. It presumes to tell us how we should live our lives, what to believe, what's okay to eat and wear, how to form families, who receives medical care and what that entails, who we socialize with or who we marry, where we can shop or when we can shop, travel, or work. It can enforce and perpetuate patriarchal systems and divide people into saved and not saved. Religious institutions, in an effort to save face and maintain power and control, cover up the worst sins committed by those in their own ranks, showing mercy to the perpetrators and paying for the silence of the abused. And it can be a shield that people hide behind and use to justify distasteful and discriminatory practices, including how women, LGBTQ folks, people of color, and others they deem sinful or different are treated. Religion can be used to impose force through zealots who work through politicians and those in power, taking away rights instead of expanding them. And it can serve as a middleman, literally a man in the middle between us and the divine. In the words of Carl Jung, one of the main functions of organized religion is to protect people against a direct experience of God. I'm like, ouch, yikes. And so while religion at its best, is a force for good in the world, it's the darker side that repels us so much that we feel the tension is too great and life is too short to live with it. And so we look for alternatives because, as we've also learned from Kent and Jung and others, the urge and longing to find meaning in our lives, which is often what religion is doing for people, it's a powerful force. If organized religion isn't the structure that provides that meaning, we'll find other ways to create or pursue it. And that's where spirituality comes in. And I was struck during pre-talk that what we're choosing when we choose this spiritual path is kind of the more challenging path. Because when you think of religion, like I said, there's this preconceived, almost off-the-shelf framework that you plug into. And you have a set of rules. When we're talking about spirituality, we're sort of letting those, we're guided by something a little bit different, and our compass is a little bit different. We don't have those thou shalls and thou shalt nots that are coming from someplace else, but we're having to discover them for ourselves. And we're going on this uncharted territory. And there's an expression I often use when I'm wearing my entrepreneur hat, which is you're building the plane while you're flying it. And we're building that plane while we fly it. We don't have a flight plan and we don't have a clear destination, but we're still committed to doing it. And I'm not basing what I'm going to share here on lots of reading or scholarly research. It's more, like I said, an extended meditation that comes from the result of personal reflection and lived experience of observing others and seeing how people come together and navigate life. And I wanted to share just a little story of my journey from religious to spiritual. I've tried to be religious. Probably a lot of you have tried to be religious at some point in your life. Back when I was a little girl and I felt a strong connection to the Catholic communion I was baptized into. And then as I started to think for myself, a disconnect in my late teens. And then I decided, I'm going to try. I'm just going to try to get back into church. And so I bought a catechism, I was reading it, and I was picking up books with titles like Why You Can Disagree and Remain a Faithful Catholic. Then one day when I was in graduate school, I paid a visit to a priest friend had told me about, to bring this whole what if I don't believe what the church is bringing question, or teaching question. And he said, some of us don't believe it either. I think we were primarily talking about stuff like birth control, and he's like, yeah, whatever. So that was a turning point for me. He might have thought he was reassuring me that I could be in church and still follow my conscience, still be a faithful Catholic. But instead, it convinced me that I didn't have to stay in church, and that instead, what was important was to follow my conscience and feel in greater alignment with what was true for me and what my values were saying. There wasn't a both-and way of looking at it back then. It was an either-or decision all the way. So after that, I went back and forth between going to church and not going to church. When I went, it was to an Episcopal church, because that's the religion of my husband, Andy. And later, when we moved to Traverse City, it was the United Church of Christ. Then when we went to Tacoma, a long stretch of not going, and then going to a non-denominational community, and then finally finding a home at a Presbyterian church. And in between all of that, go, not go, whatnot, it depended on, number one, was there a community that I felt resonance with? And it depended on how both and or either or I was feeling about God and religion at the time. And looking back, each of those experiences with organized religion gave me a piece of what I would say defines my spirituality today. And that brings us to what it means to be spiritual. What I'm about to say is my own meaning, and you likely, I'm almost guaranteed, have one that's different. The simplest way of putting it in terms of its difference with religion is that religion is an external structure and spirituality is an internal compass. I often feel like we do religion, but we feel spiritual. However, the two aren't mutually exclusive. pulling together my thoughts for this talk led me to consider where I've had spiritual moments in my life, and a few were actually in church. And here I'm considering spiritual experiences as those where I felt my ego melt away, where there was a sense of connection and oneness with myself and everything around me, where being was effortless, and I was aware of either a jolt or a nudge that woke me up and that said, hey, you're alive, and how awesome is that? One was when I was a teenager, and I went to Mass on the first Sunday after Lent when they put holy water back in the fonts where you could bless yourself with the sign of the cross as you enter and exit the sanctuary. And there was a moment when I first dipped my hand into that font and into that water, and I touched my forehead with that cool water. And the thought that went through my mind is, this is what it feels like to come out of the desert. This is what it is like to be thirsty and be given something to drink. And I felt filled up and emptied at the same time. Another spiritual moment happened one evening after a discussion group at the Potter's House, the UCC church I was active in Traverse City. We had had this discussion group. It was one of these very energizing, connecting, enlightening conversations that just leaves you feeling like you could just keep on talking forever. And I decided to stop downtown at Horizon Books to pick up a book that we discussed. And it was winter, it was cold, and there were a few inches of snow on the ground. And there was some fresh snow falling. And it was in these big, fat flakes, and you could see it in the street lamps, and it was all quiet, and there were no cars and no people. And I was walking this block down Front Street and just aware of it, and I felt this overwhelming calm and peace and connection. And there was something really magical about it. Like when I think about it now, I just had this, just wide-eyed wonder of it all. And even though it was at least 15 years ago, I can still recall what I felt like, and that I was both buzzing and still at the same time. I hope some of you have had those kinds of experiences. Those are internal, solitary experiences that imprinted on me a sense of wonder. And they were fleeting, but they were profound. And so that informs my personal definition of what it means to be spiritual, to be open and receptive to moments of mystery and wonder, and to let those moments work on me, to let them into my head and my heart, and allow them to be places that I return to when I need to get my center back. Those moments accumulate and add to one another to form a sort of lens through which I see and move in the world. The more moments that I'm open to, the more I am conscious of, and the more that perspective becomes my default. It's not like I go out looking for these spiritual moments. They just happen when I'm moving through life with openness and curiosity and humility. Ultimately, living a spiritual life for me means trying to live in connection and with grace. Connection means I'm in community, like we are here now, recognizing and honoring our common humanity, helping and being helped, learning and teaching, loving and being loved, and connection to what's most important. Living with grace means I try to practice compassion, humility, empathy, forgiveness, and generosity, and I hold the reins lightly. During pre-talk, as I asked people to share a little bit about their own spiritual impulses or roots, it occurred to me that we were kind of sharing a piece of our spiritual autobiography, which was an idea that I picked up from that non-denominational community in Tacoma, where one person each Sunday would have the floor for maybe 5-10 minutes, and they would share just a slice of their spiritual autobiography. And it struck me because what was beautiful was as people would share, someone else would ask a question that took it deeper. And I thought, it feels like part of what it means for C3 to be this spiritual community is that we are listening to one another. We are curious. And I know this is kind of a loaded word, but we're witnessing one another. And we're being influenced by one another. And that's part of our spiritual DNA. Yesterday, I was listening to the latest episode of On Being. that features an interview that Krista Tippett did with Nick Offerman from the show Parks and Rec. Has anyone else heard this interview? Oh my gosh, you got to listen to this. I decided within about 5 minutes that I liked Nick Offerman. By the end of the hour, I was completely in love with him. And that's okay to say, because we all have our little celebrity crushes, right? And, Andy does too, so I'm good, So anyway, listen to it. It's brilliant. Krista offered a modified version of her typical opening question about the interviewee's religious or spiritual experiences from childhood. Instead, she asked, how would you describe the roots of impulses and insights that animate you now? That I would call spiritual in the most expansive sense of the word, your spiritual and ethical and moral foundations. So how would you describe the roots of impulses and insights that animate you now? And it was that word, animate, that caught my attention. Sometimes when I'm listening to something and I see the words and all of a sudden it's highlighted. And so that word animate was just highlighted for me. And that she connected that to spirituality. And it gave me another way to define what it means for me to be spiritual. It's when I'm fully animated and fully alive. And part of my spiritual life is recognizing the impulses and insights that animate me. It brought me back to the idea that a spiritual experience for me is one that's effortless and both fills me up and empties me. The feeling of ego dissolves means that I'm more present for what is, for where I'm at, who I'm with, what I'm doing. Valerie referred to my photography. I experience that flow, a spiritual practice when I have a camera in my hand and I'm connecting with whatever I'm pointing my lens at. I'd venture to guess that most artists and creators would describe the state of flow they enter into while in the act of creation as spiritual in the sense that it animates them and brings them alive. And that connection between being animated and spirituality makes total sense when you consider the origin of the word spirit, from which, of course, we get spirituality. And before anybody can pull out their phone and Google it, I'll tell you the definition and the origin of spirit. Its primary definition is the non-physical part of a person, which is the seat of emotions and character, the soul. It comes from Middle English, from Anglo-Norman French, from Latin spiritus, breath, spirit, from spirare, if I'm saying that right, breathe. And of course, there's the British use of the word spirit, strong distilled liquor, such as brandy, whiskey, gin, or rum. And who knows, that might be closer to the kind of spirituality that appeals to you. But if we go back to the way it means in terms of breath, in a way, spirit isn't optional. Being spiritual isn't optional. We can't choose not to breathe. We can go for a time without food and water, without love and shelter, without likes and comments on our social media posts. But we can't go without breathing. The average person on land without any training or preparations that boost oxygen levels can only go without breathing for about 4 minutes, at which point they're at risk of severe brain damage. Any more than that, and death is likely the result. And so spirit, breath, keeps us alive. It literally animates us. Every time we breathe in and out, we're performing a spirit-filled act. We're filling up and we're emptying ourselves over and over and over again. Maybe that's part of why, or maybe it is why, yoga and meditation and other relaxation and centering activities have such a strong focus on the breath. Mindful breathing slows us down and reconnects us to that which gives us life. Whether or not they intend to be, activities that emphasize breath and breath awareness are spiritual practices. And here's the way poet Dana Falds puts it, and this is the reading on your bulletin if you want to follow along. She writes, "Settle in the here and now. Reach down into the center where the world is not spinning and drink this holy peace. Feel relief flood into every cell. Nothing to do, nothing to be but what you are already. Nothing to receive but what flows effortlessly from the mystery into form. Nothing to run from or run toward. Just this breath. Awareness, knowing itself as embodiment. Just this breath, awareness waking up to truth. You know from my talk title that the phrase that jumped out at me in that case was, drink this holy peace. That's what breathing is like. Drinking holy peace. Air is invisible, at least we hope it is. And when we breathe it in, we're drinking this perfectly balanced combination of gases that keeps us alive. And if that's not holy and set apart from the norm and what we can fully understand, I'm not sure what is. And air comes in peace. It meets us where we're at. It assumes our shape and our form and our mood, and it finds its way without any help from us to exactly the cells in our body that need it to survive. Intentional breathing brings us back to our bodies and the present moment. And for me, that's what allows me to be more open and receptive, and therefore more likely to have conscious spiritual experiences. Breath is also a signal that tells me when I'm out of balance, when I've lost touch with my spiritual lens. Maybe some of you do this too, but when I'm anxious or stressed or depressed, I tend to hold my breath. I don't even realize I'm doing it. And so in response, I have to take a big sigh to relieve that tension. I take deep, slow breaths to calm myself down. I pay attention to my breath, how it feels going in and out. I might even add some intentions to it, such as imagining I'm breathing in love and breathing out stress. When I'm at my best, at my most awake and present and open, I drink holy peace. My breathing is a spiritual act that keeps me alive and able to continue to contribute good in the world. When I feel gratitude for breath, I feel gratitude for spirit. So what about you? Are you letting your breath be part of your spiritual practice? Are you noticing the way it shapes your energy and your mood and how you show up? Are you letting yourself, as the poem says, feel relief flood into every cell? Are you allowing spirit to animate you and bring you more fully alive? I want us to close with a short spiritual or breathing exercise that comes from yoga. And this is called an easy breath. And it involves alternate nostril breathing, and I'll lead you through it. This type of breathing has numerous benefits. It regulates the nervous system, it lowers blood pressure, it lowers fear and anxiety, and it improves your breathing in general. And I'll be sharing this specific breathing technique from the book called The Little Book of Yoga Breathing, Pranarama. Somebody who's more into yoga probably knows how to pronounce that better than I just did. Made Easy by Scott Shaw. And so please join in if you feel comfortable doing so. So sit comfortably with your hands in your lap. Just kind of get comfortable. And if you're willing, close your eyes. Straighten your spine. Be aware and watch your breath naturally come in and then leave your body. Embrace the life-giving force of each breath. And when you feel ready, close off your right nostril with your right thumb. And inhale slowly and naturally through your left nostril. When your in-breath is complete, allow this breath to leave your body naturally also through your left nostril. And perform this exercise for 12 breaths. When you've completed your final exhalation, place your right hand back down in your lap, raise your left hand, and close off your left nostril for the same 12 natural breaths. When you've completed this repetition, place both hands in your lap and just relax for a moment. You'll feel a very calm state of mind, and mental clarity will be focused. Thank you for drinking holy peace with me this morning.